A lost vessel frozen for over 50 years. Plates still set, clothes undisturbed. No bodies in sight. But then, a noise. A sealed door creaks open, revealing 2 German shepherds. Alive. How did they survive? Who left them here? And as the ice tightens its grip, one chilling question remains. Was this ship ever truly abandoned? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The bitter Antarctic wind howled across the frozen landscape as the research team's helicopter touched down on the pristine white surface. Dr. Samuel Hayes squinted through his protective goggles, his expression stern and focused. The blades whirred to a stop, and the team began unloading their equipment with practiced efficiency. "Temperature's holding at -40, Hayes announced flatly, checking his instruments. He didn't bother looking at his teammates, his mind already racing through the research protocols they needed to establish. Logan Reed jumped down from the helicopter, his boots crunching in the snow. 2 German shepherds, Echo and Titan, bounded out after him, their thick fur ruffling in the harsh wind. Their excited barks echoed across the empty expanse. "Easy there, you two," Logan called out, his voice warm despite the biting cold. The dogs immediately fell into step beside him, their training evident in every movement. He caught Hayes watching the dogs with barely concealed disapproval. "Those animals better not interfere with the equipment," Hayes muttered, carefully unpacking a sensitive scanning device. Logan smiled patiently. "These animals have saved more lives than you can count, Doc. They're as much a part of this team as any of us." The rest of the research team worked together, setting up their base camp with the easy familiarity of people who had done this many times before. Dr. Ben Crawford, the marine biologist, helped Logan secure the dog's shelter, while Hayes methodically arranged his scientific instruments. The ice core samples from this region should provide unprecedented data about climate patterns. Hayes explained to no one in particular, his voice carrying the first hint of emotion anyone had heard from him. Excitement about the science. But something was wrong. Echo and Titan suddenly stopped their routine patrol of the camp perimeter. Their ears perked up, and they began pawing at the ice, whining urgently. "What's got into them?" Crawford asked, watching as the dogs became increasingly agitated. Logan frowned, moving closer to his canine partners. "They're trained to react to anything unusual. Something's bothering them." Hayes barely glanced up from his equipment. Probably just picking up scents from previous expeditions. The dog's behavior grew more intense. They began barking frantically, digging at the same spot with determined focus. Logan had never seen them act this way before. "Doc," Logan called out, his voice tense, "you might want to take a look at this." Hayes sighed in irritation but brought over his scanning equipment. As he began taking readings, his expression changed from annoyance to disbelief. He adjusted the settings and scanned again. This can't be right," he muttered, the color draining from his face. "What is it?" Crawford asked, moving closer. Hayes swallowed hard, his scientific detachment cracking for the first time. "There's something down there. Something massive. Metal. And according to these readings..." He paused, double-checking his instruments. "It's at least the size of a football field." The wind howled around them as the team gathered to look at Hayes' readings, while Echo and Titan continued their urgent barking at whatever lay buried deep beneath their feet. The team worked methodically through the Antarctic night, their powerful floodlights casting long shadows across the ice. The specialized drilling equipment whined and groaned as it bore through layers of ancient frost, guided by Hayes' precise calculations and the dog's persistent marking of the spot. "Another 10 meters, Hayes called out, his eyes fixed on the depth readings. For once, his usual detachment had given way to an almost childlike curiosity. "Whatever's down there, we're getting close." Logan stood nearby with Echo and Titan, who hadn't left the site since their discovery. The dog's behavior puzzled him. They seemed more alert than anxious now, as if standing guard over something precious. "There!" Crawford shouted as the drill hit something solid. "Metal contact!" The team switched to careful excavation, using heated tools to melt away the surrounding ice without damaging whatever lay beneath. Slowly, a dark shape emerged from its frozen tomb. First, they uncovered what appeared to be a bow. Then more of the structure revealed itself, unmistakably a ship's hull. Crawford's eyes widened as he brushed away frost from a partially visible nameplate. "This can't be," he whispered, his breath visible in the frigid air. "It's the Polaris." "The Polaris?" Hayes asked, frowning. "That name isn't in any of our research databases." "It wouldn't be," Crawford explained, his voice filled with awe. "It's only mentioned in fragments of old records. The ship vanished over 50 years ago. No distress signal, no wreckage found. It just disappeared." Logan ran his gloved hand along the hull, his military training making him acutely aware that something wasn't right. "This metal, it's too pristine," he said slowly. 50 years in ice should have left some damage, but this looks almost new. The team cut a careful entrance through the hull, making sure to document everything for their research. As they stepped inside, their flashlight beams revealed a scene that made them all stop in their tracks. The ship's interior was perfectly preserved, as if frozen in a moment of time. Plates and cups still sat on the mess hall tables, some with half-eaten meals. Jackets hung neatly on hooks by the entrance. Personal items, books, photographs, letters, lay scattered about, waiting for their owners to return. "Where is everyone?" Crawford whispered, voicing what they were all thinking. They moved from room to room, finding the same eerie scene repeated throughout the ship. Bunks were made with military precision, personal belongings carefully arranged. Logbooks lay open on desks, entries stopping mid-sentence. But there was something even more unsettling than the perfectly preserved state of the ship. There wasn't a single trace of human remains to be found. Hayes stood in the ship's main cabin, his scientific mind struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. "This is impossible," he muttered, picking up a coffee mug that still held liquid, frozen solid. "It's as if the entire crew just vanished." A cold draft whispered through the corridors of the Polaris, making the team pause in their exploration. Hayes pulled his thermal jacket tighter, his scientific mind already working through the impossibility of what they were experiencing. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, checking his handheld equipment. "The hull is completely sealed. There shouldn't be any air movement at all." Logan noticed Echo and Titan becoming increasingly agitated, their ears perked forward and their bodies tense. As experienced rescue dogs, they were trained to remain calm in almost any situation. Their behavior now sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Listen," Crawford whispered suddenly, holding up his hand. In the silence that followed, they all heard it, a faint scratching sound echoing through the metal walls. Something was moving deeper within the ship. "That's not ice settling," Logan said quietly, his search and rescue instincts kicking in. "Something's alive down there." The dogs led the way, their nails clicking against the metal floor as they followed the mysterious sound. The team moved cautiously through narrow passages, their flashlight beams cutting through decades of frozen darkness. The scratching grew louder as they descended into the lower levels of the ship. Hayes consulted the ship's layout they'd found in the captain's quarters. "This leads to one of the storage rooms," he said, his usual detachment giving way to nervous anticipation. The scratching was clear now, coming from behind a heavy metal door marked cold storage. Frost had sealed the door shut, forming thick ice around its edges. Logan stepped forward, his military training evident in his careful approach. "Stand back," he instructed, using a heated tool to melt the ice around the door's edges. With a grunt of effort, he forced the handle down and pulled. The door opened with a crack of breaking ice, releasing a burst of even colder air. Their flashlights revealed shelves of frozen supplies, but it was what lay in the corner that made them all gasp. 2 German shepherds lay curled together on an old blanket, their fur frosted, but their bodies moving with shallow breaths. As the light hit them, they lifted their heads weakly, their eyes reflecting the beam. "This is impossible," Hayes breathed, for once at a complete loss for words. They couldn't have survived." Crawford moved forward slowly, his medical training taking over. "They're alive," he confirmed in disbelief, kneeling beside the dogs. "Severely hypothermic, but alive." Logan joined him, checking the dogs' conditions, while Echo and Titan whined anxiously behind them. How could they have survived for 50 years? It's not possible. The dogs were thin, but not emaciated, their fur thick and healthy despite the frost coating it. They looked at the team with alert, intelligent eyes that held no hint of 5 decades of isolation. Hayes stood in the doorway, his analytical mind racing. First, a perfectly preserved ship with no crew, and now this, he said, shaking his head. Nothing about this makes any sense. Logan knelt beside the 2 German shepherds, his trained hands gentle as he checked their vital signs. Despite the extreme cold, both dogs were alert and responsive, their brown eyes following his movements with remarkable awareness. "They're weak, but stable," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "We need to get them warmed up slowly." He pulled off his outer jacket and carefully wrapped it around the shivering animals. "I'm calling them Echo and Titan," he said softly, scratching behind their ears. "They've earned names after surviving this long." Dr. Hayes frowned, his scientific mind struggling with the impossibility before him. "They can't be the original dogs from 50 years ago," he said, pacing the small storage room. "Perhaps they're descendants. But even that doesn't explain their survival in these conditions." Crawford had been examining the room more closely, his flashlight beam catching on a leather-bound book wedged between supply crates. "Look at this," he called out, carefully extracting what appeared to be the captain's logbook. The pages were stiff with cold, but remarkably preserved. The team gathered around as Crawford carefully opened the book, revealing neat handwriting that documented the ship's final days. The entries started normally enough: weather conditions, coordinates, crew status. But as Crawford turned the pages, the tone changed dramatically. "Listen to this," Crawford said, his voice growing hushed as he read from one of the final entries. "March 15th. Engine failure complete. No radio contact, supplies running critical. Crew morale low, but spirits of Echo and Titan remain strong. They keep us going." Logan continued tending to the dogs as Crawford read on, each entry painting a clearer picture of the crew's desperate situation. The final entry made them all fall silent. "If you find this, please save them. We couldn't." The weight of those words hung heavy in the frozen air. Hayes stopped his pacing, his usual clinical detachment cracking as he looked at the 2 survivors. "They abandoned ship," he said quietly. "But before they left, they made sure these dogs had a chance." "The crew must have calculated everything perfectly," Crawford added, studying the storage room with new understanding. "The ventilation, the insulation, even the position of the ship in the ice. They turned this room into a survival chamber." Logan stroked Echo's frost-covered fur, his throat tight with emotion. "They sacrificed their own supplies to keep them alive," he said, noting the carefully arranged provisions around the room. "They gave them everything they could." The team's rescue dogs whined softly from the doorway, as if sensing the profound significance of what they were witnessing. Echo and Titan responded with weak tail wags, their resilient spirits evident even after their unimaginable ordeal. "We need to get them out of here," Logan said firmly, already planning their extraction. "We're going to finish what that crew started. We're going to save them." The discovery of the next locked room changed everything. When they finally managed to force it open, the beam of their flashlights revealed a scene that made them all step back in shock. There, seated around a large table in the ship's mess hall, were the frozen bodies of the crew, perfectly preserved, as if they had simply fallen asleep together. Logan's breath caught in his throat. They chose this," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look at how they're positioned. This wasn't an accident." Crawford moved closer, his scientific detachment failing him as he examined the scene. The crew members sat upright, some with their heads bowed, others leaning against each other. Their faces were peaceful, showing no signs of panic or struggle. "The supplies in the storage room," Hayes said, his usually steady voice trembling. "Those weren't leftovers. They were rations the crew deliberately set aside." For the first time since the expedition began, the glaciologist's composed exterior cracked. He reached out and touched one of the frozen tables, his hand shaking. "They gave everything to keep those dogs alive." Crawford found another logbook on the table, its pages open to a final entry. "We've made our choice," he read aloud. "The dogs trust us completely. We won't betray that trust by letting them starve. What remains of our supplies will keep them alive until help arrives. We go to our rest, knowing we did right by them." The weight of their sacrifice hung heavy in the air. These men hadn't been stranded without options. They had chosen to give their last resources to ensure the survival of two loyal companions who had served them faithfully. Logan's radio crackled to life, breaking the solemn silence. "Sir, we're picking up a massive storm system heading our way. ETA 3 hours. We need to evacuate soon." Hayes looked at the crew's bodies, then back toward the storage room where Echo and Titan waited. His usual logical, detached approach to decisions was failing him. For the first time in years, he felt tears stinging his eyes. "We have to take them with us," Logan said firmly, voicing what they were all thinking. "Those men didn't die, just for us to leave Echo and Titan here." "The extra weight, the resources needed," Hayes began, but his voice trailed off. The scientific arguments felt hollow in the face of such profound sacrifice. "Look at them," Logan said, gesturing to the crew. "They gave everything so these dogs would have a chance. We're their chance. We're what they were waiting for." The radio crackled again with increasing urgency. "Storm's picking up speed, sir. We need your call." Hayes looked at the peaceful faces of the crew one last time, then straightened his shoulders. "Get the transport ready," he said. "We're bringing them home. All of them." The team hurried back through the frozen corridors of the Polaris, their footsteps echoing against metal walls that had held secrets for half a century. Echo and Titan followed close behind Logan, their trust in him already apparent despite their years of isolation. "We don't have supplies allocated for 2 additional living beings," Hayes argued, his breath visible in the cold air. "This is a research mission, not a rescue operation." But his voice lacked its usual conviction, still shaken by what they discovered in the crew's final resting place. Crawford checked his tablet, frowning at the weather data streaming in. "The storm's gathering strength faster than predicted. We've got maybe an hour before it hits full force." Logan knelt beside Echo and Titan, who pressed against him as if sensing the tension in the air. "These dogs survived 50 years in isolation because those men chose to die for them." His voice was thick with emotion. "If they were worth saving 50 years ago, they're worth saving now." Hayes ran a hand through his graying hair, his scientific pragmatism warring with the profound impact of what they'd witnessed. "The extra weight will slow us down. We'd be risking the entire team's safety." "Then we move faster," Logan countered, standing up. "We've got enough supplies if we ration carefully. These dogs survived on nothing but what those men left behind. They deserve a chance." The radio crackled with static before a voice cut through. "Base to research team, storm's intensifying. You need to evacuate immediately. Window of safety closing in 45 minutes. The team looked at each other, the weight of the decision heavy in the air. Echo whined softly, pressing his nose against Logan's hand, while Titan stood alert, as if ready for whatever came next. Hayes stared at the dogs, seeing them not just as complications to the mission, but as living testaments to the sacrifice they'd discovered. The crew of the Polaris had given everything to keep these animals alive, believing someone would eventually find them. "If we leave them," Crawford said quietly, "we're no better than those who abandoned the Polaris in the first place." Hayes took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening as he made his decision. "Logan, can you guarantee they'll follow your commands? We can't have them running off in the storm." "They'll stay with us," Logan said with certainty. "They've waited 50 years for rescue. They're not going to run now." "Base to research team, do you copy?" "Storm approaching critical levels. Immediate evacuation required." Hayes looked at his team, then at the dogs who had survived against impossible odds. "Radio base, tell them we're coming back." He paused, his expression softening as he watched Echo and Titan. "Tell them we're bringing passengers." The team worked quickly, fashioning makeshift carriers for Echo and Titan from equipment straps and empty supply bags. The dogs remained surprisingly calm as Logan secured them, their eyes watching his every move with complete trust. "We need to move now," Crawford called out, checking the latest weather data. "The storm's already at our doorstep." Outside the Polaris, the wind had picked up dramatically, turning the pristine Antarctic landscape into a swirling mass of white. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees in just 30 minutes, and the sky had transformed into an ominous gray wall. Hayes double-checked his GPS unit, his fingers stiff despite his thermal gloves. "Base is 2 kilometers northeast. In clear conditions, it would be a straight shot." "These aren't clear conditions," Logan replied, securing his goggles. He attached a safety line between team members, a lifeline in the growing whiteout. "Everyone stay close. Follow my lead exactly." They began their trek through the intensifying storm, the wind howling around them like a living thing. Echo and Titan moved steadily, despite their weakness, seemingly energized by their rescue. The dog's presence added weight and complexity to their movement, but Logan's military experience showed in every calculated step. 20 minutes into their journey, the storm unleashed its full fury. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, the wind-driven snow creating a white wall that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The cold bit through their protective gear, each breath painful in their lungs. Hayes felt his confidence wavering with every step. The logical part of his mind calculated their diminishing odds of survival, while the weight of their decision to rescue the dogs pressed heavily on his conscience. He watched as Logan navigated ahead, the safety line between them, their only connection in the blinding storm. "Wait!" Crawford's voice barely carried over the wind. "The GPS signal. Something's wrong." Hayes pulled out his own unit, his heart sinking as he saw the screen flickering erratically. The storm was interfering with their navigation equipment, rendering their carefully plotted route useless. Logan held up his hand, signaling the team to stop. The wind screamed around them as he consulted his compass, but even that seemed unreliable in the magnetic fields of the polar region. "Our exit path is gone," Logan shouted over the storm. "The winds shifted the snow. We're walking blind." Hayes felt the cold seeping deeper as reality set in. They were lost in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with 2 rescued dogs and failing equipment. The storm had trapped them in a white maze with no visible way out. "The storm's beyond anything they predicted," Crawford yelled, huddled close to maintain communication. "We need to find another route, or we'll freeze out here." Echo and Titan suddenly became alert, their ears perking up despite the howling wind. Something in their behavior changed, as if they sensed something the humans couldn't perceive through the blinding snow. The team stumbled into the ice crevasse, grateful for any respite from the merciless storm. The natural formation carved into the glacier provided just enough space for them to huddle together, their backs pressed against the smooth, cold walls. The wind still howled above them, but here they could at least hear each other speak. Logan carefully lowered Echo and Titan from their carriers, while Crawford immediately began checking their condition. The dogs were shivering, but remained alert, pressing close to each other for warmth. "Their heart rates are elevated," Crawford reported, his medical training evident in his careful examination. "They're dehydrated and exhausted, but they're fighters." He pulled out an emergency thermal blanket, wrapping it around the 2 dogs. Hayes paced in the limited space, his frustration visible even through his frost-covered gear. "We need to think about our own survival now," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We're lost, nearly out of supplies, and the temperature's still dropping. These dogs," he gestured at Echo and Titan, "they're compromising our chances." "That's not who we are," Logan shot back, his tone firm but calm. "If we leave them, we might as well have left the Polaris untouched. What was the point of finding them if we're just going to abandon them like—" He stopped himself, but everyone knew what he meant, like their original crew had been forced to do. A sudden crackle came through their radio, cutting through the tension. "Base to expedition team," the voice fought through heavy static. "We've launched. Navigation drone. Assist. Your location." Hope flickered briefly in Hayes' eyes. The base's drones were equipped with advanced navigation systems and thermal imaging, exactly what they needed to find their way through the storm. They huddled around the radio, straining to hear through the interference. Minutes ticked by as they waited for updates, the only sound the whimpering of the dogs and the endless howl of the wind above. Then came the sound they'd been dreading, a high-pitched mechanical whine, followed by the distinctive crack of something hard hitting ice. "Base to team," the radio crackled again. "Drone. Malfunction. Crashed. Unable to launch backup. Conditions too severe." Hayes slumped against the ice wall, the last of his composure cracking. "That was our last chance," he whispered, his voice hollow. "We're on our own out here." Echo and Titan stirred beneath their blanket, their eyes moving between the team members as if they understood the gravity of the situation. Despite their weakness, there was something steady in their gaze, something that seemed to echo the resilience that had kept them alive for 50 years in the frozen ship. Crawford finished securing the thermal blanket around the dogs and checked his watch. "We have maybe 3 hours of daylight left," he said, his voice grim. "After that, the temperature will drop even further." The team emerged from their icy shelter into the full fury of the storm. The wind cut through their protective gear like frozen knives, and the snow reduced visibility to mere feet ahead. Before them loomed a towering ridge of ice and rock, their only path forward. Logan carefully secured Echo to his back, using climbing straps and spare rope. The dog whimpered softly, but remained still, seeming to understand the gravity of their situation. Crawford did the same with Titan, checking and double-checking the knots. "This is insane!" Hayes shouted over the wind, his eyes wide behind his goggles. "We'll never make it up there in these conditions." "We don't have a choice," Logan called back. already testing handholds in the ice. "We stay here, we freeze to death." The climb was brutal. Every movement had to be carefully planned, each handhold tested before trusting it with their weight. The added burden of the dogs made balance even more precarious. The wind grew stronger as they ascended, threatening to tear them from the face of the ridge. Crawford went first, followed by Hayes, with Logan bringing up the rear. They moved slowly, methodically, fighting against exhaustion and the numbing cold. Echo and Titan remained remarkably still, as if they knew the slightest movement could spell disaster. Halfway up, disaster struck. A violent gust of wind slammed into them, catching Hayes off guard. His ice axe slipped from its hold, and suddenly he was falling backward, arms windmilling desperately in the air. A scream tore from his throat as his feet left the ice. Logan's hand shot out with lightning speed, catching Hayes' wrist in an iron grip. The force of Hayes' fall nearly pulled them both off the ridge, but Logan's other hand maintained its death grip on his ice axe. Echo pressed closer to Logan's back, as if trying to help balance him. "I've got you," Logan shouted, his face contorted with effort. "Grab the wall." Hayes' free hand scrabbled against the ice, finally finding purchase. His breathing came in terrified gasps as he pulled himself back against the ridge, his entire body shaking. "You saved my life," Hayes managed to say once he was secure again. "That's what we do," Logan replied simply. "We save each other." The rest of the climb was painfully slow, but they finally reached the top. As they pulled themselves over the edge, Crawford suddenly pointed into the whiteout conditions. "Look," he shouted, "over there!" Through the swirling snow, a faint light flickered in the distance, the warm glow of their base camp's exterior lights. The sight should have brought pure relief, but something in the way the light wavered made Logan's experienced eyes narrow with concern. Between them and safety, a new challenge was taking shape in the growing darkness. The wind grew more savage as they trudged toward the distant light of their base. Every step was a battle against nature itself, their bodies leaning into the gale just to stay upright. The dogs, still strapped to their backs, shivered constantly, despite the protection of emergency blankets. Crawford stumbled first. Logan noticed his friend's increasingly unsteady gait, how he kept shaking his head as if to clear it. Then, without warning, Crawford's knees buckled, and he pitched forward into the snow. "Ben!" Hayes rushed to Crawford's side, helping Logan turn him over. Crawford's face was frighteningly pale, his lips taking on a bluish tinge. When they removed his gloves, his fingers were white and hard to the touch, early stages of frostbite. "Can't feel my hands," Crawford mumbled, his words slurring. "So tired." Logan quickly unstrapped Titan from Crawford's back. The dog immediately pressed against Crawford's side, trying to share what warmth he could. Hayes stood back, watching the scene unfold, something shifting in his expression. "We have to carry him," Logan said, already preparing to lift Crawford. "He won't make it otherwise." To everyone's surprise, Hayes stepped forward and knelt beside Titan. "I'll take the dog," he said quietly. His hands were gentle as he secured Titan to his own back, the same dog he'd argued against saving just hours before. "You focus on Ben." Logan's eyes met Hayes's, and a moment of understanding passed between them. Without another word, they pressed on through the storm, Logan half carrying Crawford while Hayes led the way with both dogs. The base grew larger as they approached, its lights barely visible through the thick curtain of snow. Relief turned to dread, however, when they reached the main entrance. The metal door was completely sealed by a thick layer of ice. "No, no, no," Hayes muttered, pounding on the frozen hatch. The wind howled around them as if mocking their predicament. Crawford was barely conscious now, and even the dogs were showing signs of severe distress. Logan ran his hands along the edge of the door, his experience taking over. The ice must have formed during the storm. The backup generator probably failed, shutting down the door's heating element. "There has to be another way in," Hayes shouted over the wind, his voice carrying an edge of desperation that would have been unthinkable just days ago. He held Titan closer, feeling the dog's trembling body against his back. "We didn't come this far to die, on our own doorstep." Echo suddenly perked up, his ears twitching. Despite his exhaustion, he began pulling against his restraints, trying to move toward the east side of the building. "Wait," Logan said, his eyes following Echo's movement. "The emergency access shaft. It's on the other side. It has a manual override that doesn't depend on power." They began making their way around the building's perimeter, fighting against time and the elements. Crawford's breathing had become shallow, and the dog's whimpers were growing weaker. Their survival now depended on finding that access shaft before the storm claimed them all. The frozen metal of the backup hatch groaned under Logan and Doctor. Hayes' combined strength. Their muscles burned with exhaustion, but desperation drove them forward. The wind howled around them like an angry beast, threatening to sweep them all away into the endless white void of Antarctica. "Push harder," Logan shouted over the storm, his face red with effort. "We're almost there." Dr. Hayes, who had always preferred the quiet precision of his lab work, now threw every ounce of his remaining strength into the task. His hands, numb from cold, despite his thick gloves, gripped the metal handle as if his life depended on it. Because it did. Not just his life, but all of theirs, including the two remarkable dogs they had found frozen in time. With a sudden metallic screech, the hatch burst open. They quickly pulled Dr. Crawford through first, his body limp but breathing. Echo and Titan followed, their fur covered in ice crystals, but their eyes still alert and watchful. The rest of the team stumbled in after them, and Logan sealed the hatch behind them with a decisive clang. They all collapsed onto the floor of the entrance chamber, their chests heaving, their bodies trembling from cold and exhaustion. The sudden silence after the roaring storm felt almost deafening. Dr. Hayes lay flat on his back, his eyes closed, simply focusing on breathing. A warm, wet sensation on his cheek made his eyes flutter open. Echo stood over him, gently licking his face, while Titan nuzzled his shoulder. Despite everything, the cold, the fear, the near-death experience, Dr. Hayes felt something bubble up from deep inside him. It started as a small chuckle, then grew into full-blown laughter. Okay, he said between laughs, reaching up to scratch behind Echo's ears. "I get it. You're saying thank you." The medical team burst through the inner doors, armed with thermal blankets and emergency supplies. They worked quickly, checking vital signs and treating the early stages of frostbite on Dr. Crawford's hands and feet. The base's veterinarian immediately began examining Echo and Titan, who remained remarkably calm during their checkup. As warmth slowly returned to their bodies and color to their cheeks, Dr. Crawford sat up suddenly, his eyes wide. "The ship," he said, his voice hoarse. "Before we left, I picked up something on our equipment. A signal. Some kind of recorded transmission. It was too weak to decode out there, but I managed to download it." He fumbled with a small device from his pocket, his fingers still clumsy from the cold. The room fell silent as a crackly voice emerged from the speaker, a voice from 50 years in the past. "This is Captain Everett Shaw of the Polaris," the voice began, heavy with emotion. "If anyone finds this message..." The crackling voice from the past filled the warm recovery room, making everyone forget their recent brush with death. Captain Shaw's words came through clearly, despite the age of the recording, each syllable heavy with emotion. "We've been trapped here for weeks now," the captain's voice continued. "The ship, she's frozen solid in the ice. No way to break free. We thought we could wait it out, But our supplies. There was a long pause, filled only with static. Our supplies won't last. Not for all of us. Dr. Hayes sat up straighter, his body still wrapped in thermal blankets. Echo had settled next to him, her head resting on his leg, while Titan remained close to Logan. The room was completely silent except for the haunting voice from the past. "The dogs," Captain Shaw's voice cracked. "Echo and Titan. They've been our lifeline out here. When 3 of our crew got lost in a whiteout, they found them. When the ice started cracking under our feet, they warned us. They've saved our lives more times than I can count." Dr. Crawford adjusted the device, enhancing the signal as best he could. His hands were still shaking, but not from the cold anymore. "We had a choice. One life for another," the captain continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "And when it came down to it, loyalty. Loyalty deserves to live on. These dogs, they've given everything for us. Now it's our turn to give everything for them." Dr. Hayes felt something wet on his cheek, and this time it wasn't Echo's tongue. It was his own tears. He looked down at the German shepherd beside him, seeing her not just as a rescued animal, but as a living testament to an incredible sacrifice. "We've stored enough food to keep them alive," Shaw explained. "The cold, it'll preserve everything. Maybe someone will find them. Maybe ... His voice trembled. "Maybe our sacrifice will mean something." Logan leaned forward suddenly, his trained ears catching something in the recording. "Wait," he said. "The transmission, it just cuts off. There's more to it, isn't there?" Dr. Crawford nodded, checking the device. "The signal's incomplete." It seems like the captain was going to say more, but something interrupted the recording. Maybe the storm, maybe equipment failure. "Or maybe," Logan said softly, "there's more to their story still frozen in that ship. More answers waiting to be found." Dr. Hayes looked at the 2 dogs, living bridges to a past filled with both tragedy and incredible human sacrifice. The weight of what they'd discovered, of what they'd saved, finally settled fully on his shoulders. These weren't just dogs they'd rescued. They were the last living pieces of a story of extraordinary loyalty, both human and canine. In the warmth of the research base's medical wing, the team slowly recovered from their brush with death. Echo and Titan lay curled up together on a specially prepared bed. Their once matted fur now clean and brushed. The medical staff had treated their malnutrition and dehydration, amazed at how quickly the dogs bounced back from their decades-long ordeal. Dr. Hayes watched them from his bed, his frostbitten hands wrapped in protective bandages. He couldn't help but smile as Echo lifted her head every few minutes to check on him, her loyalty already cemented despite their short time together. "Their blood work is remarkable," Dr. Crawford said, reviewing medical charts on his tablet while sitting in a chair between the beds. "Whatever preservation effect the ship's environment had on them, it's unlike anything we've seen before." Logan Reed, who had refused to stay in bed despite the doctor's orders, paced the room restlessly. "We need to go back," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "That transmission didn't end naturally. There's more to the story." "Logan's right," Dr. Crawford said, setting down his tablet. "I've been analyzing the ship's logs we managed to recover, and something's not adding up." He pulled out his laptop and turned it toward the others. There was an encrypted file partially erased. I've been running restoration software on it all morning. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, wincing at the movement. "What did you find?" "Look at this entry," Dr. Crawford said, pointing to the screen. "It's dated 3 days before the final log entry we heard." He began reading. "Elias refuses to leave without the dogs. My son has always been stubborn, just like his old man. But this time, he's right." The room fell silent. Even Echo and Titan seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their ears perking up at the tension in the air. "Elias Shaw?" Dr. Hayes whispered. "The captain had a son?" "There's no record of him in any historical document about the Polaris," Logan said, finally stopping his pacing. "Not one mention in any crew manifest or official record." "The entry continues," Dr. Crawford said, squinting at the partially restored text. "If anyone finds this, please understand. What we're about to do isn't just about the dogs. It's about—" He shook his head. "That's where it cuts off. The rest is too corrupted to recover." Dr. Hayes looked at Echo and Titan, then back at the laptop screen. "All this time we thought we knew the whole story. A captain and his crew making the ultimate sacrifice. But there was someone else there. Someone who might have changed everything. A son who's never been mentioned in any historical record," Logan added, "who apparently had a special connection to Echo and Titan." Dr. Crawford closed his laptop slowly. "The question is, why was every trace of Elias Shaw erased from history? And what really happened in those final days aboard the Polaris?" The team gathered in the base's research room, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers, shipping manifests, and crew records. Despite his bandaged hands, Dr. Hayes meticulously scrolled through digital archives on his tablet, while Dr. Crawford cross-referenced physical documents spread across the large central table. Echo and Titan lay quietly in the corner, watching their newfound family with attentive eyes. The dogs seemed to sense the importance of their work, barely making a sound except for the occasional soft whine. "Here's something, Doctor," Crawford said, carefully unfolding a yellowed newspaper clipping. "It's from a local paper in Nova Scotia, dated 3 months after the Polaris disappeared. Local orphanage welcomes new ward, 8-year-old boy." He looked up at the others. "The name's been redacted, but the timing matches." Logan leaned over his shoulder, studying the grainy black and white photograph that accompanied the article. "Look at his eyes," he said softly. "They're exactly like Captain Shaw's from the crew photos." Dr. Hayes set down his tablet, rubbing his tired eyes. "I found something in the classified naval records, a document authorizing the placement of one Elias Shaw into protective custody at St. Michael's Home for Children. It's marked top secret." "But why hide his existence?" Dr. Crawford wondered aloud. "Why erase him from every official record of the Polaris?" Logan pulled up the ship's navigation data on the main screen. "Maybe this is why," he said, pointing to the final coordinates. "Look at the ship's course before it became trapped. These aren't random movements of a vessel caught in a storm." Dr. Hayes stood up, moving closer to the screen. "These are deliberate course changes," he said, his voice filled with dawning realization. "The Polaris wasn't lost. It was following something." "Or someone was leading them there," Logan added grimly. "Someone who didn't want witnesses." Dr. Crawford shuffled through more papers. "According to these records, Elias Shaw would be in his early 60s now. He could still be alive, never knowing the truth about what happened to his father." "Or maybe he does know," Dr. Hayes said quietly. "Maybe that's exactly why they hid him away and erased his existence from every record." Echo suddenly lifted her head, letting out a soft whine. Titan followed suit, both dogs' eyes fixed on the navigation screen, as if they recognized something in those final coordinates. "The question isn't just what happened to the Polaris," Logan said, walking over to scratch behind Echo's ears. "It's why someone wanted them to end up exactly where we found them. And why they went to such lengths to hide the existence of a little boy who lost his father." The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over them. What had started as a miraculous discovery of 2 surviving dogs had evolved into something far more complex, a deliberately hidden tragedy that had torn apart a family and buried a truth that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. The Antarctic morning brought clear skies and relative calm, a stark contrast to the deadly storm they'd barely survived. Dr. Hayes stood at the base's window, watching the sun glint off the endless white landscape. His bandaged hands clutched a cup of coffee, steam rising in lazy spirals. "The weather window is perfect," Logan said, joining him at the window. "If we're going back, it has to be now." Dr. Crawford spread out their satellite imagery on the common room table. "The path should be clearer after the storm. Most of the loose snow will have compacted." Echo and Titan perked up at the activity, their tails wagging as they sensed the energy in the room. They'd recovered remarkably well, their eyes bright and alert, coats beginning to shine with proper care. "We need to go back, Doctor," Hayes said firmly, surprising everyone with his conviction. Whatever Captain Shaw was trying to tell his son, he deserves to know. The words felt strange coming from him, the usually detached scientist now driven by something deeper than academic curiosity. The team geared up methodically, double-checking their equipment after the lessons learned from their last expedition. This time, Echo and Titan watched eagerly as the humans prepared, clearly wanting to join them. "They should come," Logan said, kneeling beside the dogs. "They might help us find something we missed." The journey back to the Polaris was almost peaceful compared to their desperate escape. The dogs bounded ahead on their leashes, occasionally stopping to sniff at the snow, as if remembering their own path to survival. Inside the ship, everything remained exactly as they'd left it. Their footprints still marked the frost-covered floors, and the air held that same eerie stillness. But now they moved with purpose, heading straight for the captain's quarters. "There was something odd about the wall paneling," Dr. Crawford said, running his gloved hand along the wooden surface. "It didn't match the ship's blueprints." Logan directed his flashlight beam methodically across the wall, while Echo and Titan watched intently. Suddenly, both dogs began pawing at a specific spot near the floor. "Here," Dr. Hayes said, kneeling down. His fingers found a slight depression in the wood. With a firm push, there was a click, and a panel swung open. The hidden compartment was shallow, but well preserved, protected from the ice that had infiltrated other parts of the ship. Inside sat a metal strongbox, its surface still gleaming after all these years. Dr. Crawford carefully lifted it out. "It's locked, but look." He pointed to an envelope wedged beneath the box, the paper yellowed but intact. Dr. Hayes gently extracted it, his hands trembling slightly as he read the faded writing on the front. "To my son, Elias." The team stood in silence, the weight of history heavy in their hands. Echo and Titan pressed close to their legs, as if offering support for whatever revelations the letter might hold. With reverent care, Dr. Hayes held the aged envelope in his trembling hands. The paper was delicate, worn thin by time, but somehow preserved by the Antarctic cold. The team huddled closer, their breath visible in the frozen air of the captain's quarters. "Should we?" Dr. Crawford's voice trailed off, heavy with the weight of the moment. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly. "We have to, for Elias." Using a small knife, he carefully slit the envelope open, mindful not to damage its precious contents. The letter inside was written in a steady hand, the ink still clear despite the decades that had passed. As Dr. Hayes unfolded it, something small and metallic slipped out, catching the beam of their flashlights. Logan caught it before it hit the floor. A silver locket, tarnished but intact. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "My dearest Elias, if you're reading this, then you've finally found the Polaris, and with it, the truth about your father's fate. I want you to know that every choice I made thinking of you. We knew the storm was coming. Our instruments gave us warning, and we had time to abandon ship. But Echo and Titan, they were more than just dogs to us. They saved our lives countless times, led us through impossible conditions. When we realized we couldn't take them with us through the storm, the choice became clear. The crew agreed unanimously. We wouldn't abandon them to die alone in the ice. So we stayed, making sure they had everything they needed to survive. Our last act will be to protect the innocent lives that protected us for so long. I'm sorry I couldn't watch you grow up, son. Know that my love for you was as boundless as these ice fields. Dr. Hayes' voice cracked as he finished reading. Logan was staring at the locket in his hands, his face pale with recognition. With slightly shaking fingers, he opened it, revealing a small, faded photograph of a young boy with bright eyes and a familiar smile. I know this name, Logan whispered, his voice barely audible. Elias Shaw. He was my mentor in search and rescue training. He's the one who taught me everything I know about working with dogs in extreme conditions. He looked up at the team, his eyes wide with disbelief. He never knew what happened to his father. All these years, he's been carrying on his father's legacy without even knowing it. Echo and Titan moved closer to Logan, as if sensing the emotional significance of the moment. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. The son who never knew his father's fate, unknowingly following in his footsteps, teaching others the very skills his father had died protecting. The revelation hit the team like a physical force. Logan sat down heavily on a nearby crate, still holding the locket, his mind racing through memories of his training days. Elias. He lives in Thunder Bay now. Semi-retired, but still consulting on rescue operations. Logan's voice was thick with emotion. All those times he talked about working with rescue dogs, about never leaving anyone behind. He was living out his father's values without even knowing where they came from. Dr. Hayes pulled out his satellite phone, his earlier scientific detachment completely gone. His hands were steady now, driven by purpose. We need to contact him. He deserves to know the truth about his father, about all of this. Dr. Crawford nodded, carefully gathering the letter and other documents they'd found. The sacrifice these men made. Elias needs to understand what kind of man his father was. Logan stood up, tucking the locket safely into his chest pocket. I can reach out to him. He trusts me, and this isn't the kind of news you deliver to a stranger. The team began packing up their findings, treating each item with reverence. Echo and Titan watched them work, their intelligent eyes following every movement. The dogs seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, staying close to Logan as he carefully photographed the captain's quarters for documentation. We should head back soon, Doctor, Hayes said, checking his watch. The weather window won't last forever. Just then, Echo's ears perked up. The dog's posture changed instantly, becoming alert and focused. Before anyone could react, she let out a sharp bark that echoed through the ship's hollow chambers. Logan turned toward where Echo was staring, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, through one of the ship's frost-covered windows, a shadow moved, distinctly human in shape. It stood perfectly still, watching them. Did you see that? Logan's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Hayes moved closer to the window, his flashlight joining Logan's. That's impossible. We're the only team out here for hundreds of miles. The figure remained motionless for a moment longer, then seemed to fade into the swirling snow outside. Echo continued to bark, while Titan moved protectively in front of the team, his fur standing on end. We need to check this out, Logan said, already moving toward the ship's exit. Dr. Crawford grabbed his arm. Wait, we don't know what's out there. But Echo was already following the mysterious figure's trail, her nose to the ground, barking with increasing urgency. The team exchanged quick glances, knowing they couldn't ignore this development. The team rushed out into the biting Antarctic wind, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. Logan took point, his military training kicking in as he swept his flashlight beam in wide arcs across the white landscape. Echo and Titan bounded ahead, their noses working overtime as they tracked the mysterious figure's scent. "There!" Dr. Crawford shouted, pointing to a set of fresh footprints leading away from the ship. The tracks were clear and deep in the newly fallen snow, unmistakably human. They led about 50 yards from the ship before disappearing into the swirling whiteness. Logan knelt to examine them, his experienced eyes noting their depth and pattern. "These are recent," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Whoever made these was here just minutes ago." Dr. Hayes stood nearby, his scientific mind struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. "This is impossible. No one could survive out here without proper shelter and supplies." Echo and Titan's behavior grew increasingly agitated. Instead of following the tracks further, they turned back toward the ship, their hackles raised. Deep growls rumbled in their throats as they stared at the dark entrance of the Polaris. "Something's wrong," Logan said, watching the dog's reaction. "They're trying to tell us something." Dr. Hayes' face suddenly went pale. "The bodies," he whispered. "We need to check the crew's remains." The team hurried back inside, following Dr. Hayes to the chamber where they'd found the frozen crew members. The room was exactly as they'd left it, the crew still seated in their final positions, forever preserved by the Antarctic cold. But as Dr. Hayes moved his flashlight across the faces, his blood ran cold. "Wait," he said, counting again. "There were 12 crew members when we first found them. I'm certain of it. I documented each one." Logan moved closer, his own flashlight beam joining Dr. Hayes's. "How many do you count now?" Dr. Hayes's voice shook slightly. 11. One of them is missing." The team stood in stunned silence, the implications of this discovery sending chills down their spines that had nothing to do with the Antarctic cold. Echo and Titan continued their low growling, their eyes fixed on the dark corners of the room. "But that's not possible, Doctor," Crawford whispered. "These bodies have been frozen solid for 50 years. They couldn't just—" "Get up and walk away?" Logan finished, his voice grim. "No, they couldn't. Which means someone else has been here. Someone who didn't want us to find all the bodies." The research team huddled together in the frozen chamber, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Dr. Crawford pulled out his tablet with trembling fingers, accessing the crew manifest they'd recovered earlier. "I've got the complete crew list here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me cross-reference it with our documentation of the bodies." Logan kept his flashlight trained on the seated figures while Echo and Titan remained alert, their ears perked and bodies tense. Dr. Hayes moved from body to body, helping Dr. Crawford with the identification. "Captain Everett Shaw," Dr. Crawford read out. "Check. First Officer Michael Roberts. Check." He continued down the list, matching names to faces until he reached the end. "There's our missing crew member, Henry Dawson, the ship's engineer." "The engineer," Dr. Hayes repeated thoughtfully. "Someone who would know how to survive in these conditions. Someone who would understand the ship's systems." Logan was already heading back outside. "Those tracks might tell us more," he called over his shoulder. The others followed, with Echo and Titan taking the lead. In the pale Antarctic light, Logan crouched by the footprints again, studying them more carefully. "These weren't made by someone stumbling around," he observed. "These are purposeful steps, made by someone who knows this terrain." Echo suddenly barked sharply, drawing their attention to a subtle irregularity in the ice wall about 50 yards from the ship. What at first appeared to be natural formations in the glacier now revealed themselves as something more deliberate. "That's not natural," Dr. Hayes said, approaching the ice formation. "Those angles are too precise." As they drew closer, they could see it clearly. A small entrance partially hidden by accumulated snow, but unmistakably man-made. The opening led to a shelter carved directly into the ice. Logan pulled out a fresh light stick, cracking it to life. "Stay behind me," he instructed, before ducking into the entrance. The shelter was small but efficiently designed. Shelves had been carved into the ice walls, holding various supplies. Dr. Crawford picked up a can of preserved food, wiping away the frost to check the expiration date. "This is impossible," he breathed. "This can't be more than 2 years old." Dr. Hayes examined a stack of weatherproof containers. Inside, he found fresh medical supplies, emergency rations, and modern survival gear. "Someone's been maintaining this shelter," he said. "Recently." Logan lifted a journal from a makeshift table, its pages still supple, not brittle with age. "These entries are dated within the last year," he confirmed, his voice tight with disbelief. Echo and Titan sniffed around the shelter, their behavior indicating that someone had indeed been there recently. The team stood in stunned silence, trying to process what this discovery meant. Someone had survived out here, possibly for decades, and was still actively watching the Polaris. Logan's hands trembled as he brushed away decades of accumulated ice from the shelter's floor, revealing a metal tin box that had been partially buried. The container was surprisingly well preserved, protected from the harsh elements by its careful placement. Dr. Hayes knelt beside him, his scientific detachment momentarily forgotten as he helped pry open the frozen lid. Inside, they found several pages of weathered paper, carefully wrapped in plastic to protect them from moisture. "These are recent, Doctor," Crawford observed, gently unfolding the first page. "The paper isn't yellowed or degraded like it would be if it was from the original voyage." Echo and Titan pressed close to Logan, their warm bodies providing comfort in the chilling atmosphere of the shelter. The dog's presence seemed to make the space feel less abandoned, less lonely. Logan began reading aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his throat. "To whoever finds this, I've watched over them for so long. The crew, the ship, the dogs. I couldn't save them then, but I couldn't leave them either. This has been my penance." Dr. Hayes picked up another page, his eyes scanning the neat handwriting. "This was written by someone with an engineer's precision," he noted. "The spacing, the careful documentation. This has to be Henry Dawson." "Listen to this," Dr. Crawford interrupted, reading from another page. "The storms have gotten worse over the years. Climate change, I suppose. The ice shifts more now, threatening to crush what remains of the Polaris. I know I can't protect her forever." Logan reached deeper into the box and pulled out a final note, dated just 1 year ago. The message was brief but powerful. "I failed them, but you don't have to." The team sat in stunned silence, processing the weight of these words. Dr. Hayes, who had started this expedition seeing only scientific potential, now understood the human story that had been preserved in this ice. "He survived out here," Dr. Hayes said softly, looking around the shelter with new eyes. "For decades he stayed, watching, protecting. But how? The conditions are impossible for long-term survival." Logan examined the shelter's construction more carefully. "Look at these walls, the way they're carved." He used his engineering knowledge to create perfect insulation. The angle of the entrance prevents most of the wind from entering. He built this to last. Dr. Crawford sorted through the scattered journal pages. According to these entries, he made supply runs to various research stations over the years, probably posing as a wandering researcher or explorer. That explains the modern supplies. Echo suddenly lifted his head, ears perking forward, and Titan followed suit. Both dogs stared intently at the shelter's entrance, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. The Antarctic wind howled outside the shelter as the team huddled together, processing the discovery of Henry Dawson's journal entries. The expedition's scheduled end date loomed over them like a shadow, forcing them to make a difficult decision. "We need to head back," Dr. Crawford said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "Our supplies are running low, and the weather window for safe travel is closing." But Dr. Hayes, who had maintained his professional distance throughout the expedition, stood up suddenly. His usual composed demeanor had changed, replaced by an urgency that surprised his teammates. "We can't leave yet," he insisted, his breath visible in the frigid air. "There's someone out here who's dedicated their entire life to protecting this ship and its story. We owe it to him to at least try to find him." Logan watched the usually stoic scientist with amazement. "Doc, I've never heard you argue for anything that wasn't strictly scientific before." "Maybe this is scientific," Dr. Hayes replied softly. "The study of human dedication, sacrifice, and survival against impossible odds." Echo and Titan, who had been unusually restless, suddenly began pulling at their leads, trying to head out into the vast whiteness beyond the shelter. Their behavior was focused, intentional, not the random excitement of dogs wanting to explore. "They sense something," Logan said, watching the dog's alert posture. "They've been trying to tell us something ever since we found that figure watching us." As the team stepped outside to follow the dog's lead, Echo broke free from his restraint and bounded forward, nose to the ground. The others hurried after him, watching as he began pawing at something partially buried in the snow. Logan knelt down and carefully brushed away the ice, revealing a rusted pocket watch. The metal was corroded from years of exposure, but the mechanism inside was protected. With trembling fingers, he opened the case. There, preserved behind the watch's face, was a faded photograph. The image showed two people, a man in a captain's uniform standing proudly beside a young boy of about 10. "That's Captain Shaw, Doctor," Crawford breathed, leaning in closer. "And that must be Elias." Dr. Hayes took the watch carefully, examining the photograph. "Look at their expressions, the pride in the father's eyes, the way the boy is trying to stand just like his father. This wasn't just a formal photograph. This was a moment between father and son." The team stood in silence, the wind whipping around them as they contemplated the weight of this new discovery. Echo and Titan continued pulling forward, their bodies tense with anticipation, as if they knew there were more secrets waiting to be uncovered in the endless white expanse before them. Dr. Crawford held the pocket watch under the bright laboratory lights of the research station, carefully cleaning decades of corrosion from its surface with specialized tools. His hands moved with practiced precision, treating the timepiece as if it were made of delicate glass. "There's something here," he murmured, turning the watch over. As the last bits of tarnish fell away, an inscription emerged, etched deep into the metal. "Find him!" Dr. Hayes leaned in closer, his usually stern face softening. Two simple words, but they carry so much weight. Shaw must have known someone would eventually discover the ship. Logan sat at the communication station, surrounded by modern equipment that seemed out of place next to the ancient pocket watch. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he worked to enhance the ship's final transmission data. "I think I've got it cleaned up enough," he announced, adjusting the volume. "Everyone ready?" The team gathered around as Captain Everett Shaw's voice filled the room, crackling but clear enough to understand. "This message isn't just a goodbye, it's a promise. We chose to stay because some things are worth sacrificing everything for. Loyalty isn't just about survival. It's about faith in something greater than ourselves." Echo and Titan perked up their ears at the sound of the voice, moving closer to the speakers. Their reaction sent a shiver through the room. "These dogs," Shaw's voice continued, "they represent everything we believe in. Unwavering loyalty, courage in the face of impossible odds. Someone will find this ship someday. And when they do, I pray they understand what we did here wasn't just about saving 2 dogs. It was about preserving the very essence of what makes us human." The team listened in respectful silence as Shaw's words painted a picture of sacrifice and dedication that spanned half a century. "To whoever finds this," the captain's voice grew softer, "I ask you to carry on this legacy. Not just for us, not just for the dogs, but for everyone who's ever believed that loyalty and love are worth dying for." As the main message ended, Logan noticed something odd in the audio wavelength display. "Wait a second," he said, adjusting the controls. "There's something else here." He isolated the final few seconds of the recording and amplified them. The room grew completely still as a new sound emerged, soft but unmistakable, the steady rhythm of human breathing. Dr. Hayes gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. "That's not an echo or interference," he said quietly. "Someone else was there when this recording was made." The breathing continued for several seconds before the transmission cut off, leaving the team in stunned silence. Echo and Titan stood alert, their eyes fixed on the speakers, as if they could sense the presence of whoever had been there that day, waiting in the shadows of the Polaris. Chapter 23. Returning to Civilization. The morning of departure brought clear skies and a biting cold that made even the most hardened researchers pull their coats tighter. The team loaded their equipment onto the transport plane, each person moving with the weighted steps of those leaving behind an unsolved mystery. Dr. Hayes stood at the base's entrance, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the Polaris lay buried in its icy tomb. The past weeks had changed him. The rigid scientist who arrived here was not the same man preparing to leave. He absently stroked Echo's head as the dog pressed against his leg, seeking warmth. "It feels wrong," he said softly to Logan, who approached carrying the last of their gear, "leaving with so many questions unanswered." Logan nodded, understanding written across his weathered face. Sometimes the mysteries are what keep these stories alive. He pulled out his satellite phone, checking his emails one last time. "I've sent everything we found to the investigation team. If Elias Shaw's out there, they'll find him." Dr. Crawford emerged from the base, carrying Titan in a special harness. The dog had grown stronger since their rescue, but was still recovering from decades of isolation. "Time to go," he called out, his breath visible in the frigid air. The team boarded the aircraft one by one, securing themselves in their seats. Echo and Titan were carefully strapped into specially prepared areas, comfortable but safe for the long journey ahead. The engines roared to life, their sound echoing across the empty landscape. Just as the pilot began his final checks, Echo's demeanor changed. The dog's ears perked up, and without warning, he let out a long, mournful howl that sent chills through everyone on board. It wasn't a cry of fear or excitement. It carried something deeper, more profound, as if saying goodbye to something only he could see. Logan pressed his face to the window as the aircraft lifted off the ground. The research station grew smaller below them, the vast white expanse of Antarctica stretching endlessly in every direction. Then he saw it, a dark figure standing alone in the distance, a solitary silhouette against the brilliant white snow. "Look!" he called out, pointing. But by the time others reached the windows, the figure had disappeared into the swirling snow, like a ghost returning to its resting place. Dr. Hayes gripped the armrest of his seat, his scientific mind struggling to process everything they'd witnessed. The missing crew member, the fresh footprints, the mysterious shelter, all pieces of a puzzle that might never be complete. Echo's howl finally faded, replaced by the steady hum of the engines as they climbed higher into the clear Antarctic sky. Behind them, the Polaris and its secrets remained frozen in time, guarded perhaps by someone who had chosen to become a ghost among the ice and snow. Chapter 24. The Call to Elias. The small town of Pine Haven, nestled in the Canadian wilderness, seemed frozen in time itself. Dr. Hayes sat in the passenger seat of their rental car, turning the rusted pocket watch over and over in his hands as Logan drove them down the quiet streets lined with snow-dusted trees. "That's the address, Doctor," Crawford said from the back seat, where Echo and Titan dozed peacefully beside him. The dogs had adjusted well to their new life, growing stronger each day since their rescue. They pulled up to a modest white house with green shutters and a well-tended garden, now dormant under winter's blanket. Dr. Hayes felt his heart racing. How do you tell someone their father's story after 50 years of wondering? Logan reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You've got this, Doc. He deserves to know." The three men walked up to the front door, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. Dr. Hayes knocked, and after a moment, they heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal an elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair. Despite his age, there was something of Captain Shaw in his face, the same determined set of his jaw, the same watchful gaze. "Mr. Elias Shaw?" Dr. Hayes asked gently. "My name is Doctor Samuel Hayes. We've come about your father, about the Polaris." Elias's hand trembled slightly on the doorframe. "After all these years," he whispered. "Please, come in." Inside, they sat in Elias's living room, surrounded by old photographs and maritime memorabilia. Dr. Hayes carefully handed him the pocket watch. Elias took it with shaking hands, his eyes filling with tears as he recognized it. This was his. I remember him carrying it everywhere. He opened it, touching the worn photograph inside with tender care. Dr. Crawford set up the audio equipment, and soon Captain Shaw's voice filled the room. Elias closed his eyes as he listened to his father's final message, tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. "I never gave up hope," Elias said after the recording ended. "People told me I was foolish, that no one could have survived out there. But I always felt like he was still watching over something important." He looked at the team with wondering eyes. "And now I know I was right. He was protecting those dogs, keeping them alive all this time." Dr. Hayes leaned forward. "Your father and his crew made an incredible sacrifice. They chose to stay behind to ensure Echo and Titan would survive." Elias nodded slowly, clutching the pocket watch to his chest. "That sounds exactly like my father. He always said that loyalty was the greatest virtue a person could have." He smiled through his tears. "And he proved it, didn't he? He proved it in the most extraordinary way possible." Chapter 25. A Son's Burden. Elias sat quietly for a long moment, his weathered hand still holding the pocket watch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the living room windows, and Echo and Titan lay peacefully at his feet, as if sensing the weight of this moment. "I was only 12 when he left," Elias said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember standing at the dock, watching the Polaris disappear into the horizon. He promised he'd be back by Christmas." He paused, swallowing hard. "That was the last time I ever saw him." Dr. Hayes reached into his bag and carefully withdrew the sealed letter they'd found in the ship's hidden compartment. "There's something else, Mr. Shaw. We found this in your father's quarters." Elias's hands trembled as he took the yellowed envelope. "To my son, Elias," he read aloud, tracing his father's handwriting with his finger. As he read the letter, tears fell freely down his face. Logan and Dr. Crawford exchanged glances, both moved by the raw emotion of the moment. Dr. Hayes found himself fighting back his own tears, remembering how he'd once thought such emotional attachments were weakness. "All these years," Elias said, looking up from the letter, "I've lived alone, never had children of my own, but I've spent my life collecting everything I could find about the Polaris, about the crew, about my father. I kept newspaper clippings, old photographs, anything I could find." He gestured to the walls around them, covered in maritime memorabilia. I felt like I owed it to him to keep his memory alive, even though I never understood why he didn't come home. He reached down to pat Echo's head, the dog leaning into his touch. "But now I understand. My father wasn't just lost at sea. He made a choice to save these incredible creatures, to show what true loyalty means." His voice cracked with emotion. "He didn't abandon me. He taught me the most important lesson of all, even if it took 50 years to learn it." Dr. Hayes leaned forward. "What lesson is that, Mr. Shaw?" "That sometimes the greatest love we can show is in what we're willing to sacrifice for others." Elias smiled through his tears. "I never had children to pass his story to, but maybe that's because this was the story that needed to be told, not just about a father and son, but about what it truly means to be loyal to the end." Chapter 26. The Unbreakable Bond. Echo and Titan seemed to sense the depth of Elias's emotions. They rose from their spots on the floor and moved closer, their movements gentle and deliberate. Each dog placed their head on his lap, looking up at him with understanding brown eyes. Elias's hands trembled as he stroked their soft fur. These weren't just any dogs. They were living connections to his father, survivors of a legacy of sacrifice and love that spanned half a century. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks as he scratched behind their ears. "They need a home," Logan said softly, watching the tender scene unfold. Dr. Hayes nodded, his usual scientific detachment completely forgotten in the face of such raw emotion. "We've been discussing options for their care." "No," Elias interrupted, his voice firm despite his tears. "They belong here with me. It's what my father would have wanted." He looked down at Echo and Titan, who seemed to melt further into his touch. "My house is quiet. Too quiet for too long. These brave souls deserve warmth and comfort for the rest of their days." Standing slowly, Elias walked to an old cedar chest in the corner of the room. "There's something else you should see." He lifted the lid, revealing stacks of carefully preserved papers. His hands shook as he pulled out a bundle, tied with faded blue ribbon. "Letters," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dozens of them. I found them in my mother's things after she passed." He untied the ribbon, spreading the envelopes across his lap. Echo and Titan shifted to make room, staying close to his sides. "They're all from my father, written during his expedition. Every single one marked return to sender." Elias' voice cracked. "He wrote to me. All that time, he was writing to me. But the letters never made it home." Logan and Dr. Hayes leaned forward as Elias opened one of the yellowed envelopes. The paper inside was covered in Captain Shaw's neat handwriting, full of stories about life at sea, fatherly advice, and expressions of love for his son. "All these years," Elias whispered, "I thought he'd forgotten about me. But he was trying to reach me, right until the end." Chapter 27. A New Home. The coastal Canadian winter was nothing like the brutal Antarctic cold that Echo and Titan had known their entire lives. In Elias's cozy home, they lounged on plush beds near crackling fires, their coats glossy and healthy from good food and loving care. Elias watched them from his armchair, a contented smile on his weathered face. The dogs had brought new life to his quiet house, their presence filling empty rooms with warmth and purpose. Each morning, they walked along the beach together, Echo and Titan running through the surf while Elias collected shells. Dr. Hayes and Logan visited often, their shared experience with the Polaris having forged an unbreakable bond between them. Today, they sat in Elias's living room, sharing coffee, while Echo rested his head on Logan's knee and Titan curled up at Dr. Hayes' feet. "The public response has been overwhelming, Doctor," Hayes said, showing Elias a newspaper article about their expedition. "People are deeply moved by your father's story." Elias nodded, his eyes misting. He would have never wanted recognition. He just did what he thought was right. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Logan answered it, returning with a thick manila envelope. "Express delivery from Dr. Sarah Chen at the Maritime History Institute." Inside were photocopies of old documents, weather station logs, supply requisition forms, and scattered reports spanning decades. But it was Dr. Chen's cover letter that made them all lean forward in shock. "Evidence suggests," Logan read aloud, "that someone had been making regular trips to the Polaris wreck site for nearly 50 years. Supply manifests show periodic deliveries to nearby research stations, always signed for by different names, but with identical handwriting." Dr. Hayes spread the documents across the coffee table. "Look at these dates, every few years, like clockwork. Someone was watching over that ship, keeping track of it." Echo and Titan lifted their heads, alert to the tension in the room. Elias's hands trembled as he picked up one of the forms. "The last signature," he whispered. "It's dated just 3 months before you found the wreck." They stared at the papers in stunned silence, the implication sinking in. Someone had dedicated their life to protecting the Polaris, keeping its location secret, watching over the legacy of Captain Shaw and his crew's sacrifice. The dogs moved closer to Elias, offering comfort as they always did when they sensed his emotions. He scratched their ears absently, his mind racing with questions about this mysterious guardian who had watched over his father's final resting place for so many years. Chapter 28. The Watcher's Secret. Dr. Hayes spread the documents across Elias's kitchen table, his scientific mind struggling to make sense of the scattered reports. Each one described similar sightings, a solitary figure moving through the Antarctic storms, always near the Polaris. "These can't all be coincidence," Logan said, tracing the dates with his finger. "Look at the pattern. Every few years, like clockwork, someone was out there." Dr. Hayes shook his head, his usual skepticism wavering. Henry Dawson was the only crew member unaccounted for, but surviving alone in Antarctica for 50 years, it's impossible. "The human body couldn't endure those conditions," Logan agreed. "Even with supplies and shelter, the cold alone would." Elias sat quietly, stroking Echo's fur as the dog rested against his leg. His weathered face held a different kind of understanding, one that went beyond scientific explanation. "Maybe it wasn't about survival," Elias said softly. "My father, he was a man of deep conviction, the kind that doesn't end with death." Dr. Hayes looked up sharply. "You think—" "I think some bonds transcend what we can explain," Elias continued. "The crew's sacrifice, their dedication to those dogs, that kind of loyalty leaves a mark on the world." Logan pulled out the most recent report, dated just weeks before their expedition. "This last sighting, the research station logged it 3 days before we arrived. They described the same figure, walking through a whiteout storm like it was nothing." The room fell silent as they absorbed this information. Echo and Titan, usually calm, both lifted their heads and stared intently at the window, as if sensing something beyond the glass. "We were meant to find them," Elias said, looking at the dogs. All these years, someone, something, was watching over that ship, waiting for the right moment. Dr. Hayes, despite his scientific background, couldn't deny the weight of Elias's words. He remembered the shadow they'd seen, the footprints leading nowhere, the feeling of being watched throughout their entire expedition. The last entry, Logan read aloud, says the figure was seen walking toward the ship during a storm that should have made survival impossible. The observer noted that the snow seemed to part around them, like the storm itself was keeping its distance. Chapter 29. The Final Goodbye. The morning sun cast long shadows across the small cemetery as Elias Shaw made his way between the headstones. Echo and Titan walked beside him, their steps slow and deliberate, matching his careful pace. Dr. Hayes and Logan followed at a respectful distance, giving Elias the space he needed for this moment. The marker was simple, just a name and 2 dates, with an empty space beneath. For 50 years, it had stood as a hollow reminder of uncertainty, of questions unanswered. But now, Elias thought, it felt different. Now he knew the truth. He knelt before the stone, his knees creaking with age. Echo and Titan settled on either side of him, their warm presence a comfort against the morning chill. Their gray-flecked muzzles and gentle eyes seemed to hold an ancient wisdom, as if they somehow understood the weight of this moment. "Hello, Father," Elias said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I've waited a long time to really talk to you." He reached out, touching the cold stone with trembling fingers. "I understand now. What you did. Why you did it. The sacrifice you and your crew made. It wasn't just about saving 2 dogs. It was about something bigger." Echo gently pressed his head against Elias's arm, while Titan remained perfectly still, both dogs watching the marker with an almost reverent attention. "Your loyalty, your devotion, it lived on in them," Elias continued, glancing at the dogs. "And now I see it was worth everything. Worth the wait, worth the wondering, worth the years of not knowing." Dr. Hayes stepped forward then, holding out a weathered envelope. "We found this in the final sweep of the ship's records," he said quietly. "It was sealed in a waterproof case, hidden in the captain's quarters." With shaking hands, Elias opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, his father's familiar handwriting, still clear after all these years. As he read the words aloud, his voice grew stronger. "Loyalty is more than survival. It's choosing love, even in the face of loss. That is the legacy I leave behind." The words hung in the morning air, and Echo and Titan lifted their heads, as if hearing a voice from long ago. Elias pressed his hand against the gravestone once more, tears falling freely now. "You never left us, did you?" he whispered. "You were there all along, watching, waiting, making sure your sacrifice wasn't forgotten." The dogs pressed closer to him, their presence a living testament to his father's final message. In their eyes, Elias could see the truth his father had known, that some bonds transcend time, that loyalty and love could echo through decades, surviving even the harshest storms. Chapter 30. The Legacy Lives On. 5 years passed like gentle waves on a shore. Elias Shaw's hair had turned completely white, but his eyes remained bright and alert, especially when he watched Echo and Titan playing in his backyard. The dogs had aged too, moving more slowly now, but their devotion never wavered. Dr. Hayes visited often, bringing updates about their ongoing research and sharing meals at Elias's worn kitchen table. The scientist had changed. The ice in his demeanor had melted away, replaced by a warmth that showed especially when he scratched behind Echo's ears or slipped Titan an extra treat. Logan Reed made it a point to stop by whenever he was in town. sometimes staying for days, sharing stories late into the night. He'd become more than just a visitor. He was family now, bound by the extraordinary events that had brought them together. The story of the Polaris spread far beyond their small circle. Universities included it in their curriculum, not just as a historical event, but as a case study in human nature and sacrifice. Students would lean forward in their seats, captivated by the tale of the crew who gave everything to save 2 dogs, and the mystery that still surrounded their final days. In lecture halls across the world, professors would show the photographs, the frozen ship, the crew's final resting place, and the 2 miraculous survivors who had defied time itself. They spoke of Captain Everett Shaw's choice, of Henry Dawson's disappearance, and of the shadowy figure that had watched over the wreck for decades. The vast Antarctic expanse remained unchanged, a white desert holding its secrets close. The last reported sighting of the mysterious figure had become part of the legend, a dark silhouette against the endless white, appearing and vanishing like a ghost in the snow. Some claimed it was Henry Dawson, somehow surviving against impossible odds. Others believed it was something more profound, a testament to the power of devotion that transcended even death. The Polaris itself still rested in its icy tomb, preserved by the freezing temperatures, a monument to sacrifice and loyalty. Researchers who visited the site often reported an inexplicable feeling, as if they were being watched, protected, remembered. Echo and Titan would sometimes pause during their walks with Elias, turning their heads as if listening to a distant voice. In these moments, Elias would smile, understanding that some bonds couldn't be broken, even by time or distance. If you enjoyed the story of Dr. Samuel Logan, Echo, and Titan, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. Story of Dr. Samuel Logan, Echo, and Titan. I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.